Another day of Kids in Tech. I feel pretty good because we got last week, that's out of the way. So I'm pretty happy about that. Today we're going to be talking about video games and then a little bit about addiction. And so, listen, video games are a very interesting thing to me. I think it's a lot of things about video games kids don't, or adults don't understand. And so if we were just to ask people around the room, the adults, a lot of adults are going to be like, I don't get this whole video game craze. Like, sure, games are fun, but I certainly don't get why my kid is watching YouTube or whatever, watching a video. Anybody wonder that question? Why are my kids watching somebody play a video game instead of playing the game themselves? That's my question. But we're going to see that is hugely popular, and it's something that a lot of our kids are doing. And so there's also something really interesting that goes on as I was looking through this. A lot of adults don't understand video games, but yet a lot of adults play a lot of video games. And you might be thinking, well, no, I don't pick up my kid's Xbox or PlayStation, but you probably have games on your phone. And so there's probably some of you out there who really like to play Candy Crush or Words with Friends, or whatever someone said a bowling game earlier, and listen, that's fine. But I think this idea of video games, adults look at it and think, oh, well, that's just for the kids, while we're going to see games are not just for kids, and that perception of video games and kids is actually not quite true. And so I was actually talking to someone this week, and I heard him say, I'm playing a game on my phone. And it was an adult, almost my age. I'm like, you're a gamer. No, I'm not. I was like, I understand where you're coming from, but you're playing video games. And that is a game. And so, like, this whole video game thing has just completely changed. It used to be Nintendo. Me and my wife used to play Legends of Zelda on NES. Anybody play that? And, like, you had to Google, like, how to get through, because it's like up one screen, over, down, left, and then go to the third rock on the screen and set a bomb. Anybody remember that? Like, all the kids over here are like, I don't know what it, I mean, but yeah, those were the good old days. But times have really changed. And so just to get an idea of like a mobile gaming, this isn't on your sheet, but mobile gaming is a $2.2 billion industry. 57% of the games played are puzzle games. Women actually spent more money on game content than men in 2020. A total of $76 billion was spent on just mobile games in 2020. And in 2021, $116 billion was spent. 4.7 million apps are worldwide just for games. And in 2021, there was 82.98 billion games downloaded and played on mobile phones. And so, like I said, the reason that I went over all this stats is to say, like, games have changed, and a lot of adults are playing games, but wouldn't quite consider that they're gamers. But the world outside and all the mobile app people who are making all these games look at you as a gamer because you're playing their game. So by definition, sorry, you're kind of a gamer. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I play games on my phone, and a lot of people do, and that's fine. But I think sometimes we have to step back and look at how do we view video games in today's world. And I have to be honest, I was very honest that I didn't like social media, and I'm going to be very honest, I like video games. Me and my wife last night played like an hour of Fortnite together. Some of you guys will get the TV out and stream something, and that's how you relax. Well, me and my wife played Fortnite last night, and we hadn't played for a while, but last month or so we kind of got back into it, and so we play video games. I like video games a lot. I like Madden. I like NBA 2K. I like Minecraft. I understand why people would play video games. And so, kids, I'm your best shot at helping your parents understand why we play video games. And so, in fact, when the new Xbox Series X came out, me and Andy were very diligently trying to pre-order it. He was doing it for his kids. I was doing it for myself. I had a lot of people say, oh, so you're getting that for your kids for Christmas. No. Getting it for myself. My kids know that the Xbox is not theirs, it's my Xbox. So I do like it, and I understand it. And so, like I said, kids, you're lucky that I'm up here today. And so I'm going to try to help your parents understand. But I do want to say this before we start out. When it comes to video games, we're going to see that there's some good things, there's some bad things, but it's kind of like media and a lot of other things. It's kind of like our smartphones. It all needs to be done in moderation. And so the problem is a lot of kids get on their Xbox or their Switch or PlayStation, and if you don't get them off of it, they'll play all day long. And so that's not healthy. And so let's just get that out in the front. Kids, it's not healthy to be on your screens and your Xboxes or whatever all day long. And so as we go through this, keep in mind that we need to teach our kids, and kids, as you're growing up, you need to learn moderation. Like, you can't just hop in front of Fortnite, Call of Duty, whatever it is, and play it for 6 or 7 hours and think, oh, this is great. That's a problem. But I want to just get our heads wrapped around how much video games is played and who all is playing video games. And so, like I've said before, I like statistics, but these are pretty eye-opening. The game industry is expected to reach $180 billion in revenue in 2021. And so, by the way, it did reach that, and it's projected by 2025 to reach $256 billion. And so to put that into perspective, the video game sector is larger than the movie and music industry combined. Now, I would have never have guessed that, but that's how big the video game industry is right now, and that's how much content that they're pumping out. There are more than 2.5 billion video gamers around the world. Now, 2.2 of them are mobile gamers, and so that's how the world's kind of changing. And according to Statista, there are 254 million console players in the world. 106 million of those are users in the US. And so that would be your Switches, your Xboxes, and your PlayStations. Now, esports enjoyed an audience of around 456 million people. Has anybody ever watched esports in here? Anybody? Nobody? Wow. You guys are, oh, I see an adult kind of, hey, baby. So if you don't know what esports is, it's just simply video game tournaments that people watch. And you might think, well, that sounds terrible. Why would you want to watch that? And who in the world would want to watch esports? But in 2020, there was a study done, and they were looking at some of the statistics on this, and Activate suggests that 70 million people will watch a single esports final. 70 million, which is higher than the viewership for U.S. professional baseball, soccer, and hockey finals. By the time consumers will watch 3 billion hours of esports, which account for 10% of all sports viewing. Activate projects that in the U.S., esports will have more viewers than every professional sports league but the NFL by 2021. They project that there will be 84 million viewers of esports, higher than 70 million MLB viewers and 60 million NBA viewers. This will is still dwarfed by the NFL. NFL has 141 million. So think about that. Esports, which nobody really raised their hand, and so maybe if you're an adult, you're like, I'm not going to admit that I actually watch esports. I've watched a little bit just to see why you would watch esports. I can't watch it, but there are millions of people watching esports. In fact, they're watching esports more than baseball and the NBA and any other sporting event. It's so popular that the NBA has its own esports league. The Cleveland Cavaliers have their own esports team. And if you get drafted, you play 3 or 4 months and you make between $50,000 and $60,000 just in those three or 4 months. It's crazy. More and more sports teams are getting esports teams because it's so popular. And so I just wanted to tell you guys that, just to wrap your head around the fact that video games are not going away and people are watching them more and more and more. And so, an example is my kids want to watch video games. Like if I let them, they would hop on YouTube or they would hop on something, and that's all they would watch. They would just watch it over and over and over again. And as an adult, that's very hard for me. I'm like, once again, why am I watching some dude make money on TV? And listen, I'm getting somewhere with this. Some dude on TV, and he's just playing video games. Why would I do that? Well, I'm going to watch 2 NFL games today, watching a bunch of dudes make money on TV. And so it's just a perception change. Kids don't necessarily want to watch sports all the time. They want to watch their favorite streamer or their favorite team watch video games. And it's huge, like I just read the statistics. Now, this is an interesting stat that many of you might not realize. The average gamer is 34 years old. 34 years old. I would have thought it was much younger. I would have guessed maybe like 20, 21. But the average gamer is 34. And so remember that when your kids are hopping on a video game, and they're talking to whoever it is, and we'll get to some of this too, but whoever they're talking to, there's a good chance that if your kid is 12, 13, 14 years old, that they're probably not talking to a 12, 13, 14-year-old if they're just out there playing. If they're playing a game like Call of Duty, and they're just playing the thing called Team Deathmatch or whatever it might be, they just pair you up. And so in my experience, you either get the 12-year-old who's cussing you out, true story, or you get the old guys just cussing you out and yelling at you. Like, I'm sorry that I didn't do very well, but you don't have to yell at me. But that's what your kids are experiencing. So I either got a 12-year-old yelling at me, or an old, so I just stopped playing. I'm not that great. But that's what you get. The average gamer is 34 years old. 70% of gamers are age 18 or older. So when your kids hop on, 70% of the gamers that they may come in contact could be 18 or older. 38% of U.S. gamers are aged between 18 and 34. Under 18s make up 21%. And so there's not a lot of younger kids playing when you put in comparison to the older people. There's a lot of old people playing video games. I am one of them. I help the 34-year-old statistics. 60% of Americans play video games daily. Daily. 45% of gamers are women. 41% of U.S. gamers are women. And so that was actually surprising to me. But a lot of women are playing more and more games. 65% of U.S. women ages 10 to 65 play mobile games. And so for mobile games, women play a lot of them. And once again, I'm not saying this to say it's a bad thing, but just to realize that maybe when you're playing video games, you need to think about, man, I'm on a mobile game. I am now a gamer. So maybe you have something in common with your kids after all. I don't know if I believe this stat, but 70% of parents believe video games have a positive influence on their children's lives. Does anybody in here think that it has a positive influence on their children's life as a whole? So most people are going to say no. So I don't know if I believe that stat. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Smartphones and smartwatch accounted for more than 50% of the games market by the end of 2020. And so once again, we've talked about smartphones and screens, and so smartphones are just slowly just taking over. I remember years ago, Brian Stuchel, he used to be the youth pastor here, said someday everyone's just going to play video games on their phone. I'm like, no way. Well, he was right. That's the direction we're heading. And the average video game user plays 8 hours and 24 minutes of video games a week in 2021, and that's an increase of 14% in the last year. So it's kind of crazy. It's a 14% increase from 2020. And so the idea of all this is video games are not going away, and they are widely popular. They are heavily played, and now they're watched by millions and millions of people. In fact, you have a quote on your study sheet that says, video games are silently becoming part of our everyday lives. And it's not only teenagers who are playing. People of all ages, sexes, and walks of life are joining in the frenzy. And so they're right. Everybody is playing video games, and it's just not the truest sense of, hey, I'm picking up my Nintendo Switch or whatever it is. It's on our phones. It's on our tablets. Video games are everywhere. And like I said, they're making $2.2 billion just in the mobile gaming industry. And so like I said, I do want to emphasize this again. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's like I'm not saying come in here and we're talking about video games. Don't ever play video games. No, I'm not saying that. Once again, I want to emphasize when it comes to this kind of thing, especially with a thing that it's not going to go away. Your kids are going to want to play. Listen, I fight with this all the time. My kids want to play video games all the time. If I let them, our Switch and our Xbox would be on 24/7. They wouldn't go to bed. They would be exhausted. And I think many of you with kids would understand this. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We just have to help moderate it. We have to help them understand that they can't be playing this all the time. And so back to the question, if we're going to answer the question of video games, are they bad? I think some parents right now want me to say video games are bad. All the kids are like, please don't. Please don't say it. If you say it, my parents might not let me play it. And so I want to just kind of look at some things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And these are on your study sheets. And so let's just look at some of the effects of video games. And so I think some parents, in that 70%, I don't necessarily believe it, because if we just did a poll in here, I don't think 70% of the parents would say, man, video games are great and a positive influences. I think some parents, and I've heard parents say this, or I've heard them, kids tell me, well, my parents say no good can come of video games. Well, you have to be careful with that, because all your kids have to Google is, are video games bad for me? And they're going to actually find that there's some good things that can come from video games. And the first one is improved problem solving, hand-eye coordination, and accuracy. And so I have something from access.org, and I want to just throw this out to you kids. Before you go home and say, see, I told you video games were good, I want you to look on your study sheet right now. What's the first word that comes up? Moderate. Okay? Moderate. So, moderate gaming can improve cognitive skills, problem solving, decision making, strategic thinking, attention level, manual dexterity, computer literacy, and can help kids in reading, math, and science. It increases teens' interest in STEM topics and improves their ability to process visual information quickly and correctly. Many games even take place in historical, accurate times and places, piquing the interest of teens who ordinarily would roll their eyes at the sight of history text. And so you can pick up games, and it'll teach you history. It'll help you with your hand-eye coordination and all that list. Now, in moderation, obviously. And so I was actually a little surprised by this because there's study after study after study. Like if you would just Google this and kind of look into it, there's a lot of studies that will verify this. Legitimate studies that will say, if you play video games, it'll help you. So parents, next time you think, man, video games are bad and I'm going to tell my kids never play because there's no good in video games, remember, they will probably Google it and find this type of information and remind you that there are some good things from video games. And another good thing can be family time. So in case you haven't noticed, we live in Ohio. If you haven't looked at the weather, don't. Because this next week ain't looking so great. It starts out kind of rainy and 40, and now they're saying another snowstorm. And then by Friday, now obviously this is Ohio, it can change, but they're saying -6. What do you do in -6 when you wake up in the morning? What do you do when it's dark at 5:30, it's 0 degrees out, and you got 6 inches of snow still on the ground, and like, what are you going to do, go sled riding? It's freezing. We made it 45 minutes the other day sled riding. I think it was last Tuesday. We made it 45 minutes and everyone was freezing. I was freezing. I was ready to go after 10 minutes. But after a while, you kind of start running out of things. And of course, there's board games. But sometimes what our family will do is we'll throw up the Nintendo Switch and we'll do stuff like Just Dance. You can download things like Jackbox games. Has anybody played those? There's like a lot of people. So like, they're just fun games you can play with your friends. As your kids get older, you can probably play with your kids. And so we just got a game for the Switch called Mario Golf. Anybody play Mario Kart here? I love Mario Kart. See, look at that. All you parents like shaking your head about video games, and all you guys are playing Mario Kart. But it's fun. It's fun to play with your kids. There's nothing better than your kid thinking they're going to win, and you have the blue little turtle shell, and you shoot them and you pass them and you win. There's nothing better than that. I'm sorry. That is great. Best at video. Then you beat them. Yeah, 39-year-old dad beating you. It feels good. I'm going to be honest. But there are times when you can get on and you can spend time and have fun as a family. And you can play video games, you can laugh, and you can have fun. Like I said, when it's dark and cold this week, you're not going to have a ton of options if it snows however many inches it's going to snow. But another thing, and this can be good and this can be bad, is you can meet new people and you can stay in contact with friends. And so during the lockdown, me and Craig and Matt Brocker, we would play video games together. You know, we would come into work, we would go, and we got some great stories. If I perish, I perish, Craig. And only Craig knows what that means, and Matt. But it's funny. I mean, you have good times. But you can meet a lot of new people through video games. And so that can work good or bad. I have a friend who will play video games with his son. He moderates who he's talking to. He'll be playing and we talking to the same people, and he just makes sure he knows who his kids are playing with. And I don't know the full story, but somehow he meets one of the defensive players for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he plays NBA 2K with that guy. I mean, that's a pretty cool story. Now, the odds of you meeting an NFL player and continue a relationship and playing NBA 2K with the NFL player is very rare, but I would say it's almost impossible, but I know someone who did it. And so there are all kinds of cool things. And like I can play, Xbox with friends and talk to them who live in other states. I can talk, there's another youth pastor that we try to play with sometimes from Alabama. And so you can get some good benefits like that. You can stay in touch, you can play, and it's fun. But as I'm saying this, I'm guessing all the parents in the room are probably thinking, but they can talk to anybody. And if the average age is 34, that's not necessarily a good thing. Well, exactly. The kid who plays with the Tampa Bay Buccaneer gets to do that. His parent is very involved and moderates almost everything he does. Now, that can go south for you. If I'm just being honest, there's a lot of parents who, you know what they do? They give their kids their Xbox, they give their kids their Switch or whatever it is, and they just say, hey, go ahead and go play. They don't know who they're talking to. They don't know even what they're playing half the time. And so there's games like Call of Duty. And my son, we're driving to practice this week. It was Thursday. And my son, he's 9 years old, said, Dad, when can I play Call of Duty? I said, well, son, you're not going to play Call of Duty for a long time. Well, why? I said, well, first of all, you can talk to anybody out there. Well, I'll just play with my friends. Okay, well, Really? Like, what about all the violence as a 9-year-old seeing that? What about the fact that even if you're playing Warzone and you are playing with your friends, you got about a not that I would know this, but you got about a 50-50 chance of hearing the F-bomb as you jump out of the plane. Does my 9-year-old need to be hearing that? And truly, if this is you and you're doing it, I'm sorry, but if you're crazy enough to allow your preteen or maybe even your teenager to play a game like Call of Duty or Battlefield or one of those violent games, you're opening them up to a crazy world. And not a world of just realistic violence, but a world where there's a bunch of people out there. And I promise you this, you're probably not meeting someone on Call of Duty that's going to be a healthy 34-year-old or a Tampa Bay Buck. They're going to be yelling at you. I'll be honest, I play it. I haven't played it in a while. But the last time I played, I got cussed out because I went 500 when it comes to the kill-death ratio. I didn't play very well. And this dude's yelling at it. That's the last time I played. I'm like, why am I playing a game where I'm getting yelled at by an adult? It's a video game. Like, it's crazy. But imagine your 10-year-old, 11, 12, 13-year-old playing that game and just being cussed out by somebody. And you think, well, would it really happen? I promise you, it happens all the time. And so if your kid's playing online Call of Duty or Battlefield or one of those type of games, in many, many games, you can play with anybody from around the world. And if you're not monitoring them, there's predators and there's people all the time. And so like I said, I told my son, I explained it. He's 9 now. I explained all those things to him. He's like, well, my friends do. So-and-so does. So-and-so does. I said, that's their parents' choice. I said, but as your parent, I'm not allowing you into that world. I will not allow my kids, first of all, to play a game where it's very realistic violence. And I'm certainly not letting them get cussed out by the game and other people. It's just the reality of the situation. And so if you want to do that as a parent, once again, I'm not the Holy Spirit. You need to make those decisions. But you need to be careful because what they hear and see in those games is crazy. And so one thing that happens as they begin to play all these games is disassociation. And so because you hear all these bad things and you realize people sometimes will disassociate themselves from the real world. I mean, how many of you have heard the horror stories of someone thinking that they're living in a video game? Anybody? If not, maybe it's just me doing all the research. But there was a 13-year-old. Now, this is extreme. There's a 13-year-old in China who was playing so much World of Warcraft that he was trying to reenact something, and he went up on a building, jumped off of it, and died. And there's more and more stories like that where kids can't differentiate between a video game and real life. And so those are extreme examples. But my kids kind of went through something similar, not similar to jumping off a building, but my kids were playing, it was about a year or so ago, they were playing Fortnite, and we were just letting them play, and we were watching them, and so they're playing Fortnite, and of course, Fortnite, if you don't know, it's a little cartoon guys kind of running around, beep, 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 shooting people, you pick up guns, you're trying to survive out of 100 people, and so they had a gun like an AR, a Barrett 50 cal sniper rifle, and pump shotguns, and so they were playing, and Grayson and Micah were just kind of like talking about guns and just how great they are and cool they are, and like, oh, we'll just grab a gun and we'll do this. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not how the world works. And so I started having conversations with them because they just thought guns were the coolest thing in the world and that they could just whip out a pump shotgun and do whatever they wanted to. And so after I had a conversation, my brother owns a gun shop and he just happened to have a 50 cal for sale. So I went down and I picked it up, and I don't know if you've ever held one. They're extremely heavy. The movies where they just run it along. I don't, man, kudos to you, whoever can do that, because I couldn't hold it with one hand. That probably just says more about me than them. But truly, it was heavy. So I gave it to Grayson. He's like, oh. He was like, okay, so like, what do you think about this? Well, it's bigger and heavier than I thought. Okay. And so a few days later, we like to shoot clays with our shotgun. So we took them out and we started shooting. And they all of a sudden, what my kids realized? This isn't much of a game. Micah was old enough, we let him shoot a shotgun, and he's like, wow, that's so powerful, Dad. I mean, it pushed my shoulder back, and I'm like, yeah, I know. And then it wasn't long after that, I went down, and I have some 9mm and some handguns, and we were shooting them, and Grayson was like where the stage was, and I said, plug your ears. I went through a round, I turned around, and he was gone. He was way back there. And I said, so we had some very honest conversations. And so we whittled them down. My brother teaches CCW classes. He kind of trains how to shoot. And so we whittled them down to a .22 cricket. If you don't know, it's about this big. It's very little. And even that, they were a little nervous. And I say all that to say, my kids had no idea what a real gun was like. They had no idea. Their view of a gun was from Fortnite. And what they associated guns and how to use guns and all that stuff was completely different than the real world. And I had to walk them through all of this. And so we have to be careful when our kids hop onto video games and they're just looking at things. Like, sure, they're probably not going to be the 13-year-old from China. But I'm telling you, it scared me and it scared Casey when they started talking about guns like that. Because had they walked up to a gun, they probably would have thought it was more of a toy than a weapon. They wouldn't have thought it was that dangerous. And so, truly, like, I was able to teach my kids, and I think many of you would. We live in T County. I mean, guns are kind of the thing. But imagine all the kids in the world whose parents aren't going to teach them what a gun is. And so statistically, and we're going to get to it, the violent games that we play can cause violence and help and cause our kids to be more aggressive. We're going to talk about that. But the next thing we're going to talk about is internet gaming disorder. So that's what they call people who are addicted to games. Internet gaming disorder. And so more and more people are being diagnosed with this. In fact, this year, the World Health Organization decided to include gaming disorder as the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases. Now, what you think about the World Health Organization, I probably agree with you. I don't actually think it's a disease. I think it's just put your video games down. But I say all that to say the world is now recognizing that this is a problem. The world is now adding it to their list of diseases or problems. It's because so many kids are playing video games. And so many, I mean, let's be honest, if the average is 34, so many adults are playing video games and they just can't put them down. And we have to teach our kids moderation. Like, our kids in this room should not have this disorder because we should be teaching our kids moderation. We should be helping them walk through their life and realize, like, listen, when you get married and have kids, this is probably not what it's going to look like. You know what helped me not have internet gaming disorder? A family. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. Play video games or change your kid's diaper. Play video games or take your kids to practice. I mean, that's how it is. But we have to help our kids go through this because more and more kids, and if you look at the statistics, which I'm not going to read, more and more kids have this internet gaming disorder because they can't put their phones down. And next, our kids will play all these games that are so violent, and they're just everywhere. They're on their phones, they're on their tablets, they're on their consoles, and then they become violent and aggressive. And so violence and aggressiveness is becoming more and more in our kids, and people are kind of confused by why is that? Why is my kid so aggressive? Why are my kids not obeying me? Well, what's he playing? And have you ever heard of people blaming video games for school shootings or acts of extreme violence? Anybody ever hear that? So you hear about that a lot. I mean, it's kind of one of the things people will jump to. And so I did a lot of research, and I read a lot of articles on this. And so a lot of the professionals would say that not necessarily the violence and the aggressiveness that comes from this is not necessarily what's going to cause the kids to go up and shoot up a school. And so, but what they did realize is the more that kids will play video games, more that they'll play something where you are designed to go out and hurt somebody, it will increase their violence and aggressiveness in their behavior. Which, I mean, think about it. You play Call of Duty, you play whatever, and you're just there to shoot somebody. Well, what do you think they're going to learn? I mean, the Bible says to protect our eyes and protect our mind and our hearts and all those things, and then we hop on and we got young kids playing Call of Duty and shooting everything up. And so, of course, it's going to affect their hearts and affect how they act. And on your sheet, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, 85% of video games, even ones rated E for everyone, C above for rating. I didn't put the ratings in here, but each game has a rating E to maybe 17. There might be one. I don't know. Anyways, I should have added it. But 85% of video games contain some ability of a player to intentionally harm another player. So even if you pick up a game and it says, oh, it's E, it's for everybody, there's a chance that video game is going to somewhere along the line have you focused on hurting somebody else. And so, like I said, the Bible says we need to protect ourselves and we need to protect our kids because as they continue to do this and it becomes a normal part of their life, especially if they become addicted to it, well, their acts of violence or aggressiveness could increase. Are they going to go shoot up a school? No, I don't think so. Are they going to disobey you? Are they going to be a little more aggressive towards you? Probably. I've seen it in my kids. I'm sorry, you just lost your video games for a week because you've been playing for too long and now you're being disrespectful and you're getting angry for no reasons. And you can see it if you allow your kids to play enough video games. Sometimes you can see it. And study after study after study show that it will increase your kids the way they act, their aggressiveness, and it will do those things. In a book called Glow Kids, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, there's a whole thing on gaming and a whole thing on studies and different things that have been done that'll prove this. And then there's the ever growing popularity of streaming. And so you have esports that streams tournaments, but then you have just people who hop online and stream. And so so if you're thinking, I don't know what streaming is, it's video game streaming is simply when someone sets up a system where they stream themselves playing video games. Simplest definition I could think of. And so usually it works where most of the screen is where they're playing the video game, and somewhere on the corners of the screen you'll see themselves. And so as they're playing, they're talking, and then there's a little chat thing, and so people are chatting, and the guy streaming is interacting with the people chatting. And so kids watch it all the time. Adults watch it all the time. In fact, my kids want to be a streamer. And I said, no. Well, we'll get to that. Not us in that conversation. Me and my kids will get to that. But, streaming to kids is what being an NBA player or a baseball player and an NFL player used to be. You used to, like I grew up, I wanted to play in the NBA. I wanted to be Mark Price. Well, that didn't pan out. But now kids want to be a streamer. And so streamers are the people your kids are going to watch play video games, and you're going to look at them and be like, what in the world? What in the world? Why are you guys doing this? And so the biggest streaming platform, there's multiple, but the biggest one is Twitch. It's the king of all streaming. Twitch, in the first quarter of 2021, had 8.8 billion hours of video games. That 8.8 billion hours of video games are streamed. Twitch users watch 71 million hours of content daily, and there's over 2.2 million Twitch users broadcasting their games live on Twitch. And so that's kind of mind-blowing. But there's also YouTube stuff has some streaming, and there's other streaming platforms out there, and we talked about that a little bit with social media and apps. But there's more stuff out there. And so I personally don't allow my kids on Twitch. I don't allow them on YouTube or whatever it is to watch this kind of stuff. I know they try to sneak it in, and I say, no, you're not allowed to do it. And one of the reasons is because there's 2.2 million people streaming just on Twitch. 2.2 million people. It's all live. It's not edited. They can show anything they want. They can talk, they can cuss, they can do all those things. The chat room, people can put anything they want. They can add links to the outside world anytime they want. Anybody hear of the streamer Ninja? Anybody? Okay, so Ninja, he broke out and was widely popular. You ever see a guy in a commercial with blue hair because he's in a lot of commercials. And so this guy is a streamer. And at one point, I don't know what he makes right now, but at one point he was making $500,000 a month. This is why your kids want to be a streamer. They're popular and they're making tons of money. Not all of them. Only, it's like the NBA. Only a few is going to make it to that level. But he was kind of a friendly streamer. If you'd watch him or your kids would want to watch him, I remember watching him like, oh, this guy's kind of annoying, but he's kind of funny, but he didn't cuss. And I don't know what happened. But all of a sudden, I happened to read a thing and be like, oh, he's kind of changed. And I turned him on and he's dropping the F-bomb. Like, all of a sudden, Ninja was saying whatever he wanted and talking about whatever he wanted. I don't know what happened there. Maybe he's making more money by being vulgar. I don't know. But your kids, 2.2 million people out there. And so they're all streaming and you're just flipping through and bam, there you go. And you don't know exactly what they're saying. Now, most of the streaming service, they don't allow nudity. They'll block that. Twitch actually does a good job of that. But what they don't do is, and there's a room called Just Chatting, and they don't block the ladies that are dressed half naked and talking about whatever they want to talk about. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of details. You can Google it. You can figure it out. But there's a lot of inappropriate stuff that your kids can find on these streaming things. And for me, like I said, I'm not going to let my kids go watch an R-rated movie and hear a bunch of cussing and watch a bunch of violence. But yet, I think a lot of parents would agree with that. But yet this idea of streaming, people are like, oh yeah, we'll just let our kids jump on Twitch and watch whatever. Because I promise you this, the violence and the cussing is very prevalent out there. Like, I've seen it, I've went through Twitch, it's there. And if you're not moderating what your kids are watching, it's all available. And so, although streaming, it can be innocent, but man, let me warn you, we have an enemy. And I think when it comes to all this stuff, we have to remember, we have an enemy. And there's danger one swipe away. There's people talking about perverted stuff. There's people cussing. There's people playing Grand Theft Auto. Like, listen, imagine, if you don't know what Grand Theft Auto is, parents, you just Google it. It's not great. But imagine a streamer streaming a game like Grand Theft Auto, which is one of the more popular ones, and then talking about Grand Theft Auto and everything that goes along in the game. And that's what your kid could be watching. And so if you know what Grand Theft Auto right now is, you're running it through your mind, you're thinking, oh, that's not great, because Grand Theft Auto is not a good game. It's actually a very bad game. But the idea is man, you got to watch your kid. And if you think your kids are just going to scroll through there and Satan's not going to find a way to get them in there if you're not watching them, I think you're naive, because listen, there's danger in streaming every scroll. It's just like social media. It's just like the rest of the internet. And then last, listen, let's just be honest. At the end of the day, one of the ugly things is just time wasted. You know what you don't get back? You don't get back your time that you just spent hours and hours and hours of playing video games. You don't get back your time that you lost talking to your family, your friends, playing outside, being creative. You don't get any of that stuff back. Because as some of the things that are good for video games, sadly, most of the times, you know what? Most people don't play video games in moderation. We keep emphasizing moderation, 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 but a lot of people don't play video games in moderation. And certainly if you don't monitor your kids, they won't play it in moderation. And maybe that's just my 3 kids, but if I don't monitor them, it's video games all day, every day. And so many benefits are wasted. And we lose opportunities with our family, our friends, and the list can go on and on and on. And by the way, probably the most important thing we lose and the most important time we waste is God's. We'll play video games more than, we talk about the Lord, we read, and in Ignite, one of the things we talk about is screen and what your eyes, we've been going through a series, Take Back Control. So what are your eyes seeing? What your ears hearing? What are you saying? Where's your mind? And the sad reality is that we give all those things to the world and everything else, and we just kind of forget God. And it's very easy to get lost in a video game for hours and hours and hours, and I can tell you that from experience. I mean, when Casey had Micah, I'm going to be honest, as she was napping, it was her first kid, and then the other kid, Micah was napping, I was playing the game called Skyrim. Best game ever, but I got well over 100 some hours in the game of Skyrim. I'm not proud of that. I'm just saying it's easy to get lost in an afternoon in a game like that for someone like me and many of your kids. And you know what? I look back, and what did I gain other than beating the game of Skyrim and most of its side missions? Nothing. There's a lot of other things I could have been doing. So we have to be careful just simply by just losing time. Losing time we could be with the Lord, our families, and our friends. And so here's a few things on video game tips, and I'll start going a little faster here. But there's 3 simple things you can do when it comes to video games, especially when your kids are playing. Know what they're playing. If your kids are playing a video game, know what they're playing. It seems like common sense, but I don't know if parents actually do this, because when I hear about 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds playing Call of Duty, I think, well, do you know what your kids are playing? When I think of all my kids' friends who play all these different games out there, and Five Nights with Freddy, and all these weird games that are like freaking people out, and like my kids saw a thing of it and had nightmares, I'm thinking, do you know what your kids are playing? Because it's crazy out there. The video game world is crazy. And so just simply know what your kids are playing. Play the game before they do. Read reviews. Google the game and read some reviews. It's really easy. Sites like commonsensemedia.com will lay out, not only will they have parent reviews, but they'll review it themselves. They'll give you any danger, they'll give you any violence, any nudity, any language, anything like that. And some of you are like, nudity? Oh, yeah, well, be careful what your kids are playing. Then, know who they're playing with. If the average age is 34 years old, then know who your kids are playing with. Know who they're talking to. When they're playing, walk by, either unplug their headsets if they have it, or put their headsets on. Know who your kids are playing. Don't let them play video games where they can just randomly talk to whoever. Don't let them hop on Call of Duty and get yelled at by a 34, 35, 36, 50-year-old because they didn't play very well. And then last, set limits. Limit the games they're allowed to play. Limit their screen times. And I know we keep talking about this type of stuff, but set limits for your kids. Because our kids need limits. There's a lot of kids who play video games, and there's some of them that are in here, and they don't want you to set limits, but you have to. You have to teach them moderation. And so as we wrap up kind of this last 5 weeks of going over these kind of topics, let's just talk a little bit about screen addiction. And I know that we've talked a lot about screen addiction in some of the other 9 a.m.s, but I want to go over a few things. And I just want to remind us all that when it comes to screens, not only do we have to protect our kids, we have to protect ourselves. It's very easy, I think, for any of us to become addicted to one of these screens or one of these things that we've been talking about. And so there's another paragraph on your sheet from access.org that I want to read. It says, the term addiction is usually associated with substance like drugs and alcohol, but addiction can describe compulsive behaviors as well. The compulsion to continually engage in an activity or behavior despite the negative impact on the person's ability to remain mentally and or physically healthy, defines behavioral addiction. The person may find the behavior rewarding psychologically or get a high while engaged in the activity, but may later feel guilt, remorse, or even overwhelmed by the consequences of the continued choice. Most of us aren't actually addicted to our phones in the truest sense of the word addiction. If we went without our phones for 24 hours, we might feel uneasy or like we missed something, but we wouldn't experience withdrawal symptoms like shaking or having a panic attack. So a better phrase for smartphone addiction is probably smartphone overuse. Now listen to this. What researchers do agree on is the fact that adolescents are more likely to demonstrate addiction-like symptoms for their cell phone use than other age groups. Studies show that the cell phone use peaks during the teen years and gradually declines thereafter. Excessive cell phone use among teens is so common that 33% of 13-year-olds never turn off their phone day or night. And the younger a teen acquires a phone, the more likely they are to develop problematic use patterns. So I think sometimes when we talk about addiction and we're like, well, I could go without my phone for 24 hours, and like I said, I'd be very uneasy with it. I wouldn't like it. Like I said when I was talking about smartphones, I get halfway to church or work, I got to turn around and get my phone. I don't like the idea. But if I made it all the way to work, I'm not going to be convulsing. I'm not going to break out in sweats. I'm just not going to have a great day. And so I think sometimes we think, well, are we really addicted? Like, we can cut in this, and by the way, for me, that would be a justification. But I think sometimes, we think if I just stopped using my video games, I would make it through the day. I wouldn't love it, but I would make it through the day. But as Access pointed out, and many other people, that in many other studies, it deals with compulsive behaviors, and it'll affect our kids. And it really affects our kids more than sometimes it would affect us, because as they're growing and as they're hitting 13, 14, 15, and as their brain is peaking, they're just on devices all the time. And so the more our kids are on devices, the better chance they have to become literally getting addicted to their phone or their screens. But like Access says, one thing, like I said, everybody agrees on, you have to get this, is that the effects that all tech can have on our kids, like the effects that tech will have on your young kids, on your teenagers. And so we have to be careful, because there's a reason why over the past few years there's a lot of new terminologies like internet disorders and different things. And there's a lot of different terms that describe people who are addicted to their phones or have excessive tech use. Like we talked about nomophobia. That's simply the fear of going without your phone. There's a textophrenia. That's the fear you can't send or receive text, or you can't get any type of information. People freak out, more so teens, when they realize that they're disconnected from their friends and they can't send text. It's a real thing. Then there's called phantom vibrations, and that's the feeling of your phone alerting you when it isn't. Anybody have that before? Anybody have so many notifications? By the way, I have. Got so many notifications on your phone that even when your phone's not going off, the leg that, whatever pocket you have your phone in, it starts vibrating. It's a weird thing. I solved that problem. I just turned off my notifications. I just get text message notifications. Because I was getting so many, it doesn't matter what's going on in the sports world. I mean, seriously. But I got so many sports notifications about so many random things that just, and it gets to the point where you're feeling the vibration in your leg or wherever, and it's not even there. And so these are the results of excessive use. And so though maybe people will say, well, addiction in the truest sense, it's not like a drug addict, right? It's not like I've never came off of drugs. I've heard stories of people and they convulse and they go through terrible withdrawals. And so you're probably not going to experience that with coming off, using technology. But what I found is many articles referring to phone addiction and comparing it to gambling, compulsive gambling. And I read an article from Healthline.com that said many professionals are beginning to compare technology and smartphone addiction to compulsive gambling. The reason why is that as they study these addictions, there are some similarities. There's loss of control over behavior, persistence or having real difficulty limiting the behavior, tolerance, the need to engage in the behavior more often to get the same feeling, severe negative consequences stemming from the behavior, withdrawal or feelings of irritability and anxiety when the behavior isn't practiced, and there's many more results. So what compulsive gamblers are feeling and what they struggle with, they're finding that, that's what a lot of smartphone people use. That's what a lot of people who are addicted to their technology go through. They're just like a gambling addict. And as you do more and more research, you begin to realize that they're studying screens and how the addiction can affect people more and more. And so this isn't on your sheet, but in 2010, a study in the University of Maryland, they took 200 students, were asked to give up all media, including text, for 24 hours. So nothing for 24 hours. Not bad, right? We can all do it. Many showed signs of withdrawal, craving, anxiety. Texting and IMing my friends. Now, keep in mind, things have developed into social media and DMing and all that stuff, but this was in 2010. Texting and IMing my friends give me a constant feeling of comfort, said one student. When I did not have those two luxuries, I felt quite alone and secluded in my life. Another student put it in even more direct terms. I clearly am addicted, and the dependency is sickening. According to a more recent 2015 Pew Research study of millennial communication habits, published in the American Psychology Association's journal, Psychology of Popular Media, texting messaging has increased dramatically over the past 10 years, and many teenage texters share addict-like symptoms or behaviors. In fact, the researchers indicate that such teens have a lot in common with compulsive gamblers, including loss of sleep because of the addiction, problems cutting back on it, and tendencies to lie to cover up the amount of time they are doing it. Perhaps even more shockingly, the study of more than 400 8th and 11th graders found that only 35% of teens socialize face-to-face anymore, compared with a whopping 63% of teens who now communicate mostly via text message and average 167 texts per day. And so they're comparing this to compulsive gambling. And so when you read through this, you kind of think, well, that seems so extreme. Like, kids don't socialize face-to-face anymore. And like kids now are using text messages. But if you come to Ignite, and maybe not so much now because I think we made them all feel guilty, what you begin to realize is that kids they'll just be on their phone. They're just on their phone, they're playing games, they're playing on some type of screen, they're playing a video game or whatever it is, and you try to have a conversation with them. It's like, hey, literally I've had to say, well, why don't you put your phone down? Our counselors have had to say, put your game down, because they're just so used to playing it. They're so used to talking. They're talking to me while texting or Snapchatting their friends. And I think I said this in social media. It's the weirdest thing to me, Snapchat, because, kids will just take a picture of the floor and type something and send it to your friend. Like, I don't need to see the floor. Like, I'm a real person in front of you. And certainly, what really irritates, let me tell you what irritates me, high schooler. When you take a picture of me and send it to somebody. Listen, don't take a picture of me. Garrett's laughing because he probably had it happen to him. Like, don't take a picture of me. Like, just talk to me. But the reality of the situation is face-to-face conversation, the art of communication, we're losing it. Because so many kids are on their phone. And so many kids, even when they're talking to you, actually really aren't paying attention because they're doing something else. They're snapping or something else. Like I said, I don't need another picture of a floor sent. That's just crazy to me. But that's the world that our teens live in. And so, by the way, just that last thing that I just read was from Glow Kids as well, and we're going to see some more of that. But research is finding more and more that the withdrawal symptoms may not be so much as a drug addict, but they're finding that it's more like a gambling. But the interesting thing is research, as they begin to study your brain while you're using technology, some of the things that are lighting off in your brain are just like a drug addict. And so listen to what this has to say. And also from Glow Kids, by the way, this will be a resource. You should probably read this book, parent. It's a fascinating book. So it says brain imaging research is showing that glowing screens like those of iPads are a stimulus to the brain's pleasure center and as able to increase levels of dopamine, the primary feel-good neurotransmitter. And we've talked a lot about that in the last several weeks. And it says as much as sex does. The brain orgasm effect is what makes screens so addictive for adults, but even more so for children with still developing brains that just aren't equipped to handle that level of stimulation. What's more, an ever-increasing amount of clinical research correlates screen tech with psychiatric disorders like ADHD, addiction, anxiety, depression, increased aggression, and even psychosis. Perhaps most shocking of all, recent brain imaging studies conclusively show that excessive screen exposure can neurologically damage a young person's developing brain in the same way that a cocaine addict can, or cocaine addiction can. That's right, a kid's brain on tech looks like a brain on drugs. Now think about that. Studies are showing that a kid who is excessively looking at screens is the same type, his brain is doing the same thing as a cocaine addict's brain does. And yet sometimes we will just let our kids, well, I'm bored. Okay, hop on, kid. Well, it's just easier for me to let my kids play video games while I get some peace and quiet. Or it's easier for me to hand my kid a phone at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, because that's just the norm, that's what everybody's doing. All the while, the more they use it and the more addicted they become to it, their brain lights up just like a cocaine addict's brain does when it's doing coke. That's amazing to me. And so what they've learned is that, like I said, when you look at the screens, And the kids are looking at them, and they're doing all the tests. It's the same as a cocaine addict. And I know I've said that multiple times, but I want you to get that through your head. This is the effects that the screens are having on our kids. Just imagine what that does to our kids when their brains are still developing. Your brains develop into the 20s. So a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid just addicted, and they just keep looking over and over and over and over again. Imagine if you give a kid a screen at 1 or 2, you hand them that little iPad, and they just keep watching it and watching it. What's it look like at 18, 19, 20 years old? Listen, we would say we would never, ever give our kids drugs. Yet we give our kids screens all the time in more and more studies. And you're like, well, I didn't know that. Well, parents, it's our responsibility to know these things, by the way. It's your responsibility to know what you give your kids and the effects of them. And another thing from Glow Kids, it says, in fact, going screens are such a powerful drug that the University of Washington has been using a virtual reality video game to help burn victims with pain management during their treatments. Amazingly, and this is amazing to me, that's the reason they put amazingly. Amazingly, while burn patients are immersed in the game, they experience a pain-reducing, morphine-like analgesic, sorry, I don't know that word very well, effect that does not require any actual narcotics. While this is a wonderful use of screen technology for pain management medicine, we are also unwittingly giving this digital morphine to kids. Think about that. Burn victims are going through VR, which, by the way, if you don't know what virtual reality is becoming more and more popular, but they're using it for morphine. It's taking place of morphine. That's how powerful these are. And so once again, what are we putting in front of our kids? And so this isn't on your sheet, but this is another thing from Glow Kids. It says, here's the rub, and I don't know why they use that terminology. I was kind of embarrassed to say it that way, but here's the rub. Video games for alienated kids and social media for the cheerleader are both just as addictive as heroin is to the junkie. With every burst of virtual gunfire, every tweet, or every text and tweet, there is a release, a little squirt of dopamine, just as surely as cocaine tickles our dopamine neurotransmitters. Surprisingly, digital drugs may be even more insidious and problematic than illicit drugs because we don't have our guard up about them. Meanwhile, they're ubiquitous, continuously reinforced and more socially accepted than their reviled powdered counterparts, making them so much more accessible. You certainly won't find powdered drugs in the classroom, but, well, actually, sorry. I read that and I thought, actually, you probably could find it, but it's not being promoted. Sorry, I had to say that. But you'll definitely see tablets, Game Boys, and smartphones with all their addicting and potentially mind-altering effects. Even more disturbingly, the kids get exposed to these digital drugs are getting younger and younger and younger. Once again, from Glow Kids. And so, you're never going to give your kids drugs, but they have their screens. And like that little thing that I just read, the crazy thing about it all is that it's just accepted now. Nobody condemns your phone. We went through, screens are socially acceptable, gaming socially acceptable, social media socially acceptable, all your apps are, media, Netflix, all that socially acceptable. We talked about pornography last week, and sadly that's becoming more socially acceptable. And so as this problem isn't going to go away, how do we deal with it? How do you dealing with addiction? How do you deal with it? And so we'll go through this quick, but understand the risks. Once again, I think I brought this up every time, but we have to understand the risks for our children. You can't help somebody if you don't know what the risks are. You just can't do it. And then as you begin to understand the risks, let your kids know. Talk to your kids about it. Like when Grayson asked me about Call of Duty, he's getting to the age where I just can't say no anymore. I want him to know why he shouldn't play it. I want him to be able to understand, like, listen, that's not good for me. And next, limit screen time. And we're going to be talking about this more and more, but as we come up, and we're going to have, I think Wayne and Andy are going to talk about how to lock your phones and some different stuff down. But we got to learn to limit screen times. We have to have times where there's no screens. Maybe no screen times at meal. Maybe you say before bed, 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after, there's no phones. Set family limits daily. Restrict when your kids play video games. Restrict what they play. But be intentional about this. And on your sheet, and now I've seen this in a couple different places, but Pastor John Mark Calmer recommends these boundaries around technology. Once a week, take an evening off from devices. Put your phone to bed before dinner and don't use it again until next morning. Once a month, take a full day away from devices, a whole day, 24 hours intentionally tech-free to make time for other things. Once a year, plan 1 week tech-free. 1 week, no technology. And as I read that, I think some of us would think, and myself included, holy cow, a whole week without technology. But I think that shows how much we rely on it. Could you go a week without it? And I think if we found out, I think it'd probably be better. Our kids are going to find out what it's like at camp, by the way. It's going to be great this year. It's going to be great. But then once you start taking it away, you got to learn to replace the addiction. Learn to replace your phones. And we're going to talk about resources and different stuff you can do. But listen, go ride a bike, play a sport, read, draw, do something. When your kids say, I'm bored, okay, it doesn't matter. You're bored. When I was bored as a kid, I had to be creative. Let our kids be creative and use their imagination, but find ways to replace it. There's plenty of things they could do. And next, have an open conversation and provide accountability. And it's a lot like setting limitations, but parents, we should be holding our kids accountable. And the way that we get to hold our kids accountable is just simply by saying no. No, you can't play that game. No, you can't play now. Here's when you can play. Here's when you can't play. You know, maybe crazy idea, tell your kids you can't play video games through the week. You can only play on the weekends. You're going to focus on school. I don't want to. Well, you know what? It doesn't matter. You hold them accountable. You're the parent. You get to be the boss. I think sometimes we forget as parents, we're still the boss. Just hold your kids accountable. And when you tell your kids you can't play, if you said you can't play all week, well, make sure they're accountable and make sure they do it. Don't give up. Get through the fighting and just say, listen, we're not going to do it. And help your kids learn that they don't have to have technology to have fun. They don't have to have technology to get through their lives. And I mentioned this a little earlier, but turn off notifications. You would be amazed at how little you look at your phone if you don't have notifications on. It's amazing. I went from looking all the time and my leg vibrating, truly, not making it up. It used to happen. But it doesn't happen anymore because the only time my phone really vibrates is whenever somebody texts me. And I don't get that many text messages, so it's kind of nice. And last, parents, put your screens down. You can't tell your kids to do it while hey, don't be on your phone, while you're taking pictures of the carpet and sending it to your friends. Seriously. You all laughing, but I know a few of you are doing it. Man, parents, put your phone down. Be the example. Start replacing it in your life and then learn how to replace it in your kids' life. Because you're not going to teach them anything if you're on your phone the whole time. The only thing you're teaching them is you're not setting realistic expectations, because when I am an adult, I can do whatever I want anyways. If you're going to teach them the importance of putting their technology down, you need to do it too. And then a final reminder, and this will be quick, in the last 5 weeks we've talked about smartphones, social media and apps, media in general, watching TV and all that stuff, pornography, and now video games. Parents, we have to understand that we as ourselves and our kids can be addicted to all 5 things, all 5 of them. And that's kind of scary for me because it's not just a smartphone maybe you're addicted to. Maybe our kids can be addicted to all 5 of those things. And it's hard enough to overcome one addiction. But what if our kids have to, or what if we have to overcome all 5 of those things? It's hard. And parents, we have to help our kids. They need it even if they don't want it. And because this world is set up for them to be addicted to all of this stuff, we have to work extra hard. We have to be extra diligent, and we have to get our hands dirty, and we're going to have to battle with our kids. Maybe you've set some expectation for your kids in technology, and you're going to have to backpedal. That's going to be hard. It really is, but it's worth the fight. And so listen, I know when it comes to raising kids, it's hard, but we have to be able to help them get past this addiction of media. We have to help them, especially at younger age, and never get addicted, and teach them these things. And truly, I believe this with all my heart. Our kids' futures are on the line when it comes to technology. Satan is attacking them at every angle, and we have to be able to protect them. It's our job, parents. You know, God has given us that responsibility. Dear God, we love you. Thank you for all you do for us. Just thank you for the ability to have this class. And just we do pray for Troy as he's getting ready to preach your word. We just pray that you give him the words and you speak through him, and we are all attentive and ready just to hear what you have for us today, Lord. We love you. Amen.